You're listening to the RFP Success Show with 8-time author, speaker, and CEO of the RFP Success Company, Lisa Rehurek. Tune in each episode to learn what today's capture and RFP teams are doing to increase their win percentages by up to 20, 30, and even 50%, and meet the industry trailblazers that are getting it right. Let's get started.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the RFP Success Show. I am your host, Lisa Rehurek, founder and CEO of the RFP Success Company. So I want to introduce you today to my two guests. We are going to be talking all about using visuals to tell your story. And these are two visual powerhouses, graphics powerhouses. I'm so excited to have this conversation. The first person is Cobbina. She calls herself a creative strategist, business development professional, director of marketing, and founder for MAT, which is a strategic visualization and marketing group. Did I say that? Is it MAT or is it MAT?
Either is fine. I usually say MAT, but it's MAT. Like it's but MAT is fine.
I love it. Well, welcome to the show. You've been here before, so I'm really happy to have you back.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And then our second guest is Megan Sculler. Megan works as a senior graphic designer, conceptor, and project lead at a company called 24 Hour Company. We've had 24 Hour Company on before, but not Megan, so she's new to us. And she also does select freelance assignments. So Megan, welcome to the call.
Thank you.
All right. Now, the reason that I wanted to have both Megan and on is because we process visuals 60,000 times faster than we do text. And when we're responding to RFPs, a lot of times people dial in their graphics. They kind of just throw something in, or they throw in like a really heavy, arduous graphic that doesn't tell any sort of a story. And what we want to impart to our listeners today is really some powerful things that you can think about and do, getting a little bit of a glimpse into Megan and Alma's brains of how these graphics can really make a big difference in your responses and tell the story that you're trying to tell via text. So they're going to be amazing. And I'm just going to go ahead and jump in and ask the first question. And Alma, I'm going to actually start with you. To set the baseline of this episode, would you tell us really what does a visual strategist do, and how does that relate to RFPs?
Yeah, that combo of words I picked as a way to push myself to research how I can pinpoint the value that not only my role and responsibility as a graphic designer as part of a proposal team can bring to the entire proposal process, and how I can stretch that beyond just sort of the 2-week to 63-month time frame, 60 days, 3 month, or 6-month time frame for when you're sort of in the trenches and putting together a proposal. So a lot of the times I found myself at the table, people are throwing concepts and ideas at me, and I have no idea where they came from. And I'm asking questions, and people are sort of giving me strange looks like, why would that matter? Words in boxes, do it, put it together, make it look pretty, however they want to sort of express the idea. But a lot of times it was just very unsatisfactory for me. So I was looking into visual strategy as a way to conceptualize and bring together ideas that I was exploring about graphic recording, graphic facilitation, sort of generative scribbling or doodling, note-taking, just ways in which people use visuals in their day-to-day and they don't really realize it. A lot of people talk about the different ways that people learn, visual learners, auditory learners, tactile learners, etc. But it's not a direct path. It's not a direct swim lane, right? We all sort of use whatever tool is at hand and it's quickest. And there's nothing as quick as a pen and a pencil, right? Or a pen and pencil and a paper. So visual strategy was a way to get people to think more broadly about what they bring to a graphic designer as part of the team, and how that graphic designer can add value to not only the process, the capture, and sort of the general production of the proposal, but how we can inform business development altogether by sort of tapping into not just what skill set I have, but what skill set people bring to the table anyways. And that will eventually come down to me so that when I'm sitting at that table in that conversation, I have a set of doodles to look at. I have some interconnected thoughts. And 80% of my job is kind of done because I am committed to ease. Okay.
I love that. Committed to ease.
I am committed to ease, like everybody else, right? So, you know, it's a very big difference between sitting there and somebody saying, okay, I have, this idea and I wish you would use this color and that line and that. And they're sort of talking through a lot of the things that I would usually do. But there is no why you would choose any of those different elements. There's no how this came about. It's just very nebulous and floating. And a strategy really adds to a way of thinking about how those things are connected. What appeal does it have? What benefit does it have? And how does it sort of push the narrative and the story forward? So I wanted to call myself that, to break away from the idea that really a graphic designer is just one thing or one other thing you have to do. Not to disparage, other roles like writers and solutionists and things like that. But I really just needed people to think more broadly, because text is a visual, text is a graphic, right? The fonts, their styling, all of that are thought of. And when we choose it for all of those reasons, even though those decisions are quicker. So I was hoping to push that,
Yeah. And it's really interesting what you say too, because for everybody listening, what's really important is that graphic designers are not just something that come in at the end. It's not just this thing, right? And Amma, I know this from you from our prior interview that we did a couple of years ago. And Megan, of course, I know this from you because we worked together on a couple of big projects, is like the questions that you guys ask are so powerful that it goes beyond, the questions you ask seem to go so far beyond just, like you said, Amma, the color and the shape or whatever. Like, you guys ask great questions around, what are you actually trying to say here? What are you trying to achieve? What message are you trying to send? And it is part of the bigger strategy. So Megan, now I'm going to go to you. Your specialty is in solution-driven design, probably very similar to everything we're talking about, but break that down for us. And where does that come into play in the RFP world?
Design is a process, and deciding what the goal of the graphic is part of that process. And I use the word solution driven because everything is connected in a proposal, and that's part of how we tell the story. So we need to first ask, what is the goal of this graphic? And before we even get to this graphic is meant to show the process of XYZ, first and foremost, that graphic is there to help the evaluator. It is guiding the evaluator through the RFP. And we have to remember that we're not creating it for ourselves. We have an audience. And it's really important to keep that in mind every time we set up a graphic. So first and foremost, this is to help the evaluator. Well, how is it helping the evaluator? What are we telling the evaluator with this graphic? How is it connecting back to my overall solution? How is it telling the story, helping tell the story in the proposal? So these are all the things that we need to think about. So I say solution driven because it starts way back with your storyboarding. It starts way back before Pink Team even. Start to think about, what are all of these messages that I need to bring to the forefront in my proposal?
That is so powerful too, because what's so funny is sometimes, Megan, you'll ask us a question, not even really about the graphic, but you'll say, like, what does this process even mean to the question that they're asking? Why do you even have this process in here? Right? So the questions, again, that it's like this objective viewpoint of one of you coming in and being able to see things from a different perspective and say, okay, I'm happy to put a graphic together for this process, but what's the purpose of this process? It's not even the purpose of the graphic. It takes you back even to before that, like, what's the purpose of the process, or what's the purpose of this message, to your point? So really, really powerful stuff. And so when we talk about purpose, let's dive a little bit deeper there. What purpose you kind of said it, but I want to ask this question again. What purpose or reason does a graphic have inside the RFP? Is it simply just to get the evaluator's attention? Like, what's the real purpose there? Alma, you want to take that one?
Sure. I feel as if, and I don't want to really rank it in a hierarchy because I think that leads us to some traps. But I feel as if one of the purposes that has to be on our radar is really showing and indicating to the evaluator and hopefully to the client and to the customer when they get those evaluations back is a real intimate knowledge about the project and about what they need, right? So since you mentioned, we perceive graphics much quicker than reading through text because I feel as if in our mind, when we read through text, there are things we're looking for, tone. We're trying to piece together what we read before, what's going to come. So the brain is doing a lot of work versus a graphic. When you're looking at it, you look at it for its patterning. You look at it for what's calling your attention, and colors and sizes and all of those things sort of direct your eyes further into that, your mind, to sort of make meaning that way. So the graphics and the visuals are really to support that underlining, hey, we know what you want. We know that you have to spend this amount of money and get value from it. And it has to be beneficial to not just yourself, but your end users, the people that are stakeholders on your side. And you have to feel confident in whatever we're bringing to the table, right? So I think that's one of the big ones. The next one I feel as if is cohesion and meaning, so that there's not very much left out in the nether about what could be going on in the story. Because then it's like, okay, it creates confusion and frustration at the end of the day. Even when evaluators have to sort of look at things piecemeal, you want to be able to help them form links as easily as possible. And I think those maybe are the top two that come to mind for me.
Great. What about you, Megan? Anything else to add on that one?
Yes, and all of that was fantastic. And we should keep in mind that visuals are reinforcing our messaging. Mm-hmm. So throughout the proposal, because they grab our attention, we're able to highlight things that might get missed if it's just buried within the text. I actually see this quite a bit when I review proposals. I go through and I'm like, that's important. We need to highlight that. Let's pull that out of the text. Or, whoa, there's a little process here within the text, and we really need to bring that out and put it in a visual format because now the evaluator is going to understand it. And by the way, what is the purpose of this? Let's tell them why we're even talking about this process. What are we telling them? How does it connect back? So, they're really important. Even a simple call out is a signal to the reader that, hey, pay attention to me. This is important.
Is there such thing as too many visuals? Like, how many visuals is too many visuals?
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
Because, I think people think about visuals and they think more about sort of infographics or process charts or charts and all the other stuff that's, you could build with most any visualization tool. But your tables are visuals. The fonts you use are visuals. Your call-out boxes, how you lay out your pages. It's all a field and a pattern that you have to provide the meaning to. Otherwise, then you're just throwing a bunch of things and you're making a collage and you're saying, here's our museum of stuff. Make meaning, where you can.
Right, like you have to figure it out. We're forcing them to figure it out then, and that's messy. They won't figure it out.
It's messy. Nobody has time for that in sort of an acquisition environment, right? So you need to make sure that the information that you're providing has that meaning so that it can lead to knowledge and then wisdom and have that decision made with your client, customer, end user from a place of confidence, right? And that's the end goal, so that when they're spending that money, they know they're spreading it with a good person, with a good group, a good corporation.
I see Megan nodding her head,
Yeah.
so seems like you're in agreement there. Anything else
Absolutely.
to add?
Yeah, I think as long as there is a purpose for it to be there, it should be there. We're not just designing for the sake of design in proposals. Everything that we do has a reason for being.
And so there's also kind of this consistency in the messaging through graphics, right? It's not just like, let's put this graphic here, and then 3 pages later, let's put something completely different. It looks different, it feels different. How do you suggest companies work to ensure that the consistency of their graphics throughout, not just in messaging, but also in visual appeal? Megan, let's go to you for that one.
So you want to start with a template. So the template's going to include these colors. These are the colors that I'm going to use. I'm going to decide what box style I'm going to use, and I'm going to use that same style throughout so that each graphic that includes boxes is going to have that similar feel to it. When I create icons for benefits, and those benefits are used over and over and over again throughout the proposal, I'm going to use the same icon for each benefit that it represents over and over and over again. Let's say it's low cost. I have an icon that I select to use for low cost. When I talk about it 5 pages from now, I'm going to use that same icon again for low cost. I'm not going to create a new icon for that. Our lines should all have the same thickness. You should have maybe you have 5 different lines that you need to use throughout your proposal with specific arrowheads, or maybe you have a dotted line to represent a type of communication in your org chart. Are we going to use gradients, or are we going to use flat? Are we a little bit more modern, or are we a little bit more traditional? These are all things to decide when setting up the template. And then that's your guide. You use that as a guide throughout the proposal. Whenever you make a graphic, you go back to that guide. And then what's really awesome is to take a look at it together, and it's like, is anything standing out that seems out of place? Because even when you have a template, if you're working with multiple graphic designers, that template might get used a little differently between graphic designers. And so just double checking that we're all on the same page and how we're using our colors, how we're using our lines, how we're using our shading is also good.
Great points. What do you have to follow up with that, Amma? Anything else to add to what Megan just said?
The template development doesn't have to fall squarely on your designer, because inevitably the entire process has to be collaborative. So I believe before a kickoff meeting, you really should have a content strategy meeting. Like how, not necessarily, outlining the proposal, but how do you want it to look? How do you want it to feel? What are your points of emphasis? So that you can create that template that has that customer intimacy. And it's beyond, oh, let's use this blue because I like this blue, and fellow colleague, you like this blue. But really it's taking a look at what the kind of collateral your client, customer, end user is using to see what their visual language is, right? It's part of that strategic framework that you're putting together for the proposal. So having your content development strategy meeting, blocking out an hour, 2 hours, if it's a larger pursuit, give some time and effort to actually developing it and bringing down that intelligence from capture to really sort of understand, okay, these are the kind of news reels that these people release. This is how their website looks like. This is what we've used in our marketing and sales strategy beforehand, and this is what they responded to. So all of those elements can make it into the template so that, again, the people that are going to be evaluating can see that, okay, there is some familiarity there. They've done some of the work. And then after that, making sure that you commit to doing an outline so that all those elements of the template make it into the actual story, so that when you're storyboarding, those things come with you because you can do all of that prep work at the beginning, and it's just like, well, that was fun. We're gonna leave that there. But it's a living, breathing document, you know?
Yeah, it is. And I love what both of you are saying. And it reinforces a message that I kind of said at the beginning of the call, but I want to make sure that everybody hears this. It's so important to have your graphics team on from the onset. Like, you've got to have them included in the strategic conversations around your win themes and how you're trying to position this, for a couple of reasons, not just because you're going to help really define and design those beautiful graphics, but again, because you ask really important questions that people aren't thinking about, and coming at it from a perspective that people generally aren't thinking about until, the last week, this is due in 3 days. It'd be really nice if we had a graphic here. I know I've done that to Megan before. We hope to not do that, but it's really important to bring them in on the front end. So with that, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We will be right back with more from Megan and Amma.
Is it time for an RFP process reboot? Are you ready to take an honest and thorough look at your team's RFP process to ultimately increase win rates and revenues? The RFP Success Company's diagnostic service assesses past responses for improvement opportunities, analyzes your current RFP processes, and works with you to create a highly customized RFP response roadmap. Book a call at the rfpsuccesscompany.com/call.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the call. We are here with Megan Scholar from 24 Hour Company and Amma Cobbina with MAT, and we're talking all about how visuals will impact your RFP response. And I want to really, again, emphasize how important it is to think about this more strategically versus just let's throw in a graphic the last minute. And with that, my next question is, I mentioned at the beginning of the call that we process visuals about 60,000 times faster than text. But when we start talking about graphics, a lot of times companies kind of see it as a secondary nice to have, or they'll pop into Word and create some quick smart art graphic, or they'll, God forbid, put in clip art. Don't ever, 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 ever put in clip art. But what would you share with our listeners why some of those kind of basic things are ineffective and what they might be able to do to become more effective with that? Megan, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, first off, smart art when working up a concept is not a bad thing. That can really help the author if they're not comfortable creating a sketch or doesn't quite know how to handle what they're trying to do. Smart art actually allows a lot of idea generation. So I don't think it's actually a bad thing.
Very good. I love it.
And if it is the only thing that you have at your disposal, it's better than nothing. The one thing I would say is make sure, if you are the designer, you're not really a designer, but you're the designer for your little document that you need to put together, make sure your graphics are consistent. You're popping in that smart art. There's different fields that you can choose from and different colors you can choose from. It's super exciting. Be consistent with your choices. And then think about how the smart art elements that you choose are matching to the message that you're trying to portray. So that would be my guidance for using smart art if you are the one that needs to handle it.
It sounds, Megan, like it's just a tool, right? It's just a tool, exactly. And it's all more about the message and the consistency of the look than it is about the tool necessarily that you're using.
Exactly. If it helps you get to where you need to go, use it. Why not? For larger proposals, when you have designers at your disposal, use that to communicate with your designers. You have an idea that, the funnel. Everybody loves a funnel. It should not be used for everything, but everybody loves a funnel. So you know what I'm talking about if you've messed around with smart art. So maybe if this idea where you're like, oh, this should be a funnel, well, that could start a conversation with your designer. I'm thinking about using this funnel for this message. Does that make sense? And maybe the designer's like, yeah, sure, a funnel. Yeah, we can work with that. That makes sense. eliminating stuff. We're putting stuff in this funnel and it comes down and we're eliminating it throughout. We're figuring out, and then here are the steps that we have that go through the funnel. And then at the very end, this is our product. Okay, cool. Yeah, that could be done. Or maybe the funnel is not quite right and the designer has other thoughts to give you and can guide you in a different direction. So use it as a conversational starter with designers if you're not sure how to get started with your graphic.
I love that idea so much because sometimes, like for me, I'll be in my head and I can picture it in my head and I'm trying to describe it, I'm trying to articulate it, but I can't quite do that. I think it's a great idea to either, to use, sometimes I try to sketch it, which is also a bad thing because I should never be able to sketch anything. I was not born with that talent. So I love the idea of smart art to help with that. Amma, what else can you contribute to this question?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Smart art, even the dreaded clip art, you can use those to convey those thoughts, right? If you're going to use, clip art or smart art or things that are sort of stock-ish adjacent or stock image adjacent, I suggest putting it on in a Word document. Put a field of whatever it is your thoughts are, just to see. And if you're going to scale, make sure you hold shift.
Oh, yes, please.
Oh, you know what? I always forget to do that. Tell our listeners what that is because I always forget to do that. And my team needs this too.
Yes. If you're working on a Windows, hold shift. If you're on a Mac, I believe shift also. Yes. So hold shift and make sure that you're scaling up proportionally. Because that's all.
So it's like when you're scaling, and instead of just grabbing the corner and scale, you're going to hold shift to make sure that it scales it the right way and it doesn't skew it. It doesn't shrink it or widen it.
Right.
Exactly. For your images, for your clip arts and your smart art. And put the field of it. If you have to, just write it out first, right? And then think about what those words bring up in your mind. And it might seem like a little, weird to sit there and try to visualize a word, but I promise your brain is working at that level as well. So visualizing the word first before you go out looking for clip art may seem a little strange and counterintuitive, but it'll help you when you're researching it, even if you're Googling up stuff, images to add. It'll help you sort of find that one image that will work best. And what you want to do when you're putting it all up in Word, or you can use online tools like Mural or Mira, which I think have free use of their boards. You're trying to see whether you can find that consistency that Megan talked about, right? You're trying to figure out if you are creating a visual language that makes sense, so that even if you are using those ready-made items, it's not feeling like there's not very much thought put into it, that you just sort of picked up a bunch of random things. And if you are going to do a screenshot, do a screenshot at a high resolution. Don't use print screen because that will keep you at a 72 dpi, which for printing is just not going to work as well as you think. When you're looking at it on your screen, the screen is formatted for that, right?
Was like a clipper, like my clipper, is that better than screenshot?
I think some clippers you can change the resolution if you look into your settings. Forgetting how to do that offhand, but look for those kinds of tools where you can.
And what were the other tools? Mm-hmm. Yeah, what were those other two tools that you mentioned a couple minutes ago?
So Mira is MIRA. It's an online vision board kind of situation, but you can put different images, you can put notes on it, you can add comments, you can put little icons, draw up stuff. So it's very useful if you're collaborating and you're just sort of trying to get these visuals out there. I've attended a couple conferences where they've even used it to run workshops and work sessions. So very useful. I think the second one was Mural, MURAL. And for people that have, access to some user experience type software, Figma is a good one as well. You usually use that to design apps, but you can also use it to sort of pull in visuals so that you can lay it all out and see whether you see a pattern, whether you're making connections in your own mind. And you're able to, again, pull away and think more strategically about what it is you're trying to achieve.
Like use the visual tools to help you plan the visual also, right? Yeah.
All
So,
else
okay.
fails, paper and pencil is fantastic.
Unless you sketch like I do, which is horrible. But I also want to say, like, I think I have PTSD from like corporate days of cartoon clip art, right? So it's cartoon clip art that drives me crazy. You drop in like a question mark, but it's very cartoony. Don't do that. But to your point, they have gotten much better, and icons and those kinds of things you can use stock clip art for. So that's pretty funny. All right. So I'd love to hear from both of you. Will you share with us a specific visual or graphic in which had a positive impact, like some kind of a story you could tell us about something that made a positive impact? And Megan, I'm going to go to you first.
Okay. So, as you know, proposals aren't always written the way we'd like them to be written.
Oh.
And there's a very memorable one where in a scenario, the way it was written, there are 3 tasks, and task 3 should actually have happened in the middle of task 2.
Yes.
So we had to figure out how to show that visually so that the reader would understand that actually, hey, your little task 3 over here that you need us to do actually happens over here in task 2. But we had to keep it in order. So 1, 2, 3. And this was on 11 by 17, so we had, thankfully, plenty of space. It was also a very complex process. So what I ended up doing is using a broken shape to show that we're splitting the pieces, and then I transferred the shape over, half of the shape over to the third task and kept in the space where it was supposed to go in the second task, and then using an arrow, a mixture of an arrow and a blowout and a little bit more of a shape on the task 3 to encapsulate that information, I created the visual idea that task 3 is actually coming from this area in task 2. And that client actually still brings up that graphic to this day. And that was a few years ago. So I know it made a big impact.
You know what I love about that so much is that, a lot of times people will just throw their hands up and say, well, this RFP is all screwed up. We can't respond to this question because it's not in the right order, and people get all up in arms. And I love so much because you came up with a solution to kind of redirect them and teach them, hey, this actually goes here, but also be responsive, answer the question if they've asked it. So what a great solution to that. I love that. Do you have a story for us?
Yes. Mine isn't proposal related, but I think it speaks to the idea that visuals can sort of inform the direction and the path of a project. I'm part of a collective of folks that are history buffs. We call ourselves Black to School. And what we do is we take different topics. Well, I should back up a little. What we do is we talk about the history of Black people in a larger contextual framework. So as much as we celebrate sort of Eurocentric and American-focused Black leadership, the effect that has on the diaspora is kind of drowns out everybody else. So we kind of use that kind of known history to bring out and amplify other stories. And the thing that I kept talking about at the beginning was this constellation, right? And I love space and science, and I'm a Trekkie all day, every day.
I've guessed that about you, but I love it.
Yes, love it. But the idea of a constellation and just sort of looking up at the stars is this really weird dissonance that at least happens for me between how insignificantly small we are and how much a part of this massive universe, and how our role is just even more important no matter how significantly small we are. So the visual that I created was just sort of taking these different kinds of constellations and forming sort of our imagined links, whether it's for the Little Dipper, for example, and assigning that to a topic, let's say computing, and taking it and pulling out the different stars and calling those stars moments in time, from like the Limbobo stick that was discovered in Southern Africa. That's one of the very first indications of arithmetic going on globally, to city in Dawu, which I hope I'm saying his name correctly. I apologize if I'm not. He's a Senegalese scientist, and he invented a way of computing that uses heat instead of electron movement. So that invention is allowing us to imagine what it's like to gather data from the sun. So being able to visualize that in a constellation and sort of reorient yourself when you're studying history, when you're trying to understand even the things that are happening around you right now, and that relationship between where you are standing on earth and looking up at the sky. That visual sort of brought it all home, and I can send it to you added. But
that's
but
super cool. And it's such a big message too, right? And you're able to distill that down using a graphic. And I think that's such a key message here too for our listeners, is that you can take a big message and the graphic can help you take that big message that you want to send to the world or to the buyer, right? And distill it down into something that they can immediately look at and feel. Like that to me is something that we want out of graphics, is to feel something when we look at that. Learn something or feel something, but there's an emotion involved a lot of times as well.
Yeah,
So
it's important to trace it down to a wisdom, to a grasp of a knowledge or an idea, right? So that when you're making your decisions, and you're making your decisions, whether it's in an acquisition environment or with Black to School, for example, it was in the release of a newsletter, you're sort of inadvertently and intentionally going back to some thematic focus, right? You're trying to figure out what that message is all the time and asking yourself, with every word that you write, every sentence, every narrative, how does this prove something, show a benefit, highlight a feature?
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that. Megan, I want to ask you, if you really, are there any pitfalls or common mistakes that people make when including graphics in RFPs? So I'm kind of shifting focus here a little bit, but what is like a pitfall or something that you're like, please stop doing this? What suggestions do you have for our listeners?
Putting in graphics for the sake of a graphic. There should be a purpose to the graphic. There was sometimes I'll see people just put in icons in space because there's empty space. That's okay. Let there be empty space.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. We like negative space. It helps us read. So you don't have to fill up every single space just because there's white space. There's no reason to do that. So make sure there's a purpose for the graphic or visual that you're putting in.
That's so good. We've had people tell us before, like, this page just feels too text heavy. Put a graphic in there, and it's like, all right, that's not. You can find things to do, but we don't just want to put a graphic in to put a graphic in. That's funny. Amma, what about you?
I would say definitely always have a purpose for your graphics, and think about it beforehand, because you don't want your graphic production to become a bottleneck. And unfortunately, that's sort of the undertow, I think, for why people sort of think about graphics as a nice to have, or think about graphics, at the very end when it's just like, wow, there's a lot of text. You don't want people to read that, and then you're sort of, as a designer, you're just like, well, this field of text, I don't know what to do with it. And you're not giving me a purpose for this graphic, so therefore I can't make some decisions, Thinking and involving your designers as early as possible at capture, at solutioning, even in strategic sort of marketing conversations. Because if you can create that link between your first encounter with a client, with the market, with the industry, then you can create consistency. You can allow there to be exploration. Because as graphic designers, the room to play and experiment is so vast, right?
Yes.
And even though these are sort of business driven, and depending on your market and your industry, there's a focused look and feel for everything. There is still so much room to play. So if you give your graphic designers that room, they'll be able to really impress you and do something that's compelling, that can support your narrative.
I wholeheartedly support both of those. Yes, yes, yes. And from what we see too, and we make the mistake too of sometimes not pulling the graphic designer in early enough. And it's always a mistake, right? Because that conversation up front and the strategy of it is so important. All right. So as we wrap up this episode, do either one of you have any last kind of golden nuggets or words of wisdom for our listeners when it comes to graphics in their RFP responses?
When you are storyboarding, make sure that you are including your messages and graphic concepts. Text and graphics are meant to be a marriage. They should go together. They're not, as Amma said, an afterthought. You want to be thinking about them early on in the process. Even if it's just the authors, be thinking about it. Think about how you are planning your writing, plan your graphics.
Yes, love it.
Think about your designers as the left hand of the proposal manager. If your coordinator is your right hand person and they're out there sort of helping people stay on task, coordinating activities, meetings, the layouts, and however you choose to use that role, have that graphics person be that mirror to think very visually about everything, to translate your thoughts, your ideas into a doodle, a scribble, something that can start to develop something else. Because as much as we love iterations and reviews and all of that stuff, they are tedious.
Yeah.
And proposal fatigue is a thing. So, as much as you can use your graphic designer and utilize them in documenting that process, because as soon as you start documenting something, you start to leave a trail of data and information. And as much as we like to think that that's all stuff that doesn't matter, somebody's going to say something and it'll start to mattering.
And, I think too, like graphic design is not just a task, right? And that's
it's
everything
a
that we've been and everything we've been talking about on this call so far should hopefully is resonating with the listeners to say, look, this has to be part of the strategy. And I love how you said that, to be the left hand, to really come in and be a partner and a strategic voice in all of that's happening. And, as I've said a couple of times already, 60,000 times faster people process visuals, 60,000 times. If you didn't hear it the first time, hear it the fifth time, 60,000 times faster. You can't afford to not take your graphics seriously. So I want to thank both of you, Megan, Amma, for being here. Oh, Amma had something else to say. I can see it. Go for it, Amma.
Graphics also are not social media posts. So be careful when you want to comprehend a graphic in 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds, whatever that metric is. Because at the end of the day, visuals are not just there to sort of pop out an idea and help you comprehend it. They are part, like Megan said, they're a marriage. And marriages need attention, right? So you want to pull that attention. You want people to actually stop and look at, digest, and even study your graphic. So it's not a social media post. That 10-second rule in a proposal context doesn't quite make sense, even though a lot of people think that it should.
And I have also learned that there's a huge difference between somebody that can just technically do the graphic versus people like both of you who are conceptors. I was going to call it conceptualizer. Conceptor is a much better, shorter term, but right, like you can conceptualize what that graphic is, and then the actual physical act of creating the graphic is probably the easier part, but you got to have that first part. So not all graphic designers are created equal. You've got to have people that can really understand that conceptualization to bring in the huge power punch and the value that's there. So thank you both for being here. It's been such a joy to have you and great conversations. I appreciate you. Thanks, everybody, for listening. As always, rate us, subscribe to the podcast, share with your people. We love to have new people join us, and we appreciate all of you who continue to tune in. So on behalf of my fabulous guests and myself, I want to thank you for listening to the RFP Success Show.
This has been another episode of the RFP Success Show with Lisa Rehurek, 8-time author, speaker, and CEO of the RFP Success Company. Thank you for joining us. If you have feedback on today's episode, email us at podcast@rfpsuccess.com. No matter your business size, industry, if you have an in-house RFP team, or need outside support, the RFP Success Company helps increase RFP win ratios by 10, 20, and even 50%. Learn more at the rfpsuccesscompany.com.